Well, I know it may seem kind of, off key to be like, well, what do pollinators have in common with cattle or ranching? But we run very parallel lives, and just hearing Cole's story, I'm like, just replace the sheep and the goats with bees, and I do almost the exact same thing. So I will share with you how this works, and I guess this is is this the little clicker? The big green button right there. Okay, awesome. So I always tend to really, I get nervous as well, even though I do a lot of public speaking over the years. And so I end up using a lot of pictures to help keep me on point, but I think also pictures are one of the most phenomenal ways to really share a story. We can always close our eyes and imagine, right? But when you can see the documentation of a process, it starts to make sense, and you can actually glean from it and take from it what you will or what you don't want, but then adapt it to your own scenario. So I'm going to start off with a few different things. Let's see if this is working. Yes. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 different components of the many hats that I wear, and they sort of intertwine with each other, so it's not completely going to be, categorized as such. But I'm going to start off with the individual story. I'm going to talk about community stories, and then I'll also spend a little bit of time talking about institutional or organizational stories. And this is sort of how my path has evolved, but it's always been based in community and institutional because we all learn from each other, right? So I'm going to play, hopefully is this playing? Hold on. I don't know if it looked like it had already started. Is there a way to make sure it starts from the beginning? And hopefully everybody gets the sound. So this is just a little 3-minute video during lockdown. I took a digital storytelling. I'm actually a Fulbright National Geographic storyteller, so I love the power of storytelling. And thank you. And at any rate, I took this digital storytelling workshop during lockdown because I could stand up here and tell you who I am and really try and, express all these things that I've learned, but we don't have enough time for that. And so I learned how to shorten it down to 3 minutes. So I have a little 3-minute video. I've traveled many a bumpy road in the darkest of nights, serving as a chauffeur to beings of sweet starlight. I migrate with them, like a shepherd, roaming with my flock of winged midwives, as a fellow follower of the bloom, a self-proclaimed nectar nomad. I was introduced to this artistic science of beekeeping 2 decades ago as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer collaborating with peasant farmers in South America. The bees captivated my curious mind, and working in an outdoor office made of fresh air, flowers, and freedom enticed my soul. My nomadic journey as an apiculturist has taken me far from where I could ever have imagined, having come from a humble home in Pueblo Indian country in New Mexico. My heritage is a mosaic of cellular memories influenced by my Native American ancestors, who instilled in me a profound reverence for place and purpose, and to pursue acts of community service. So I chose to become a bee farmer, as I wanted to continue to learn from Mother Nature and Father Time. As a farmer, I share beekeepers' voices of concern and need for adaptation and innovation to fulfill our dedication for local to global food production. Sharing their challenges, I became encouraged to return to academia to help quantify their observations and advocate for pollinator. I've traveled many a bumpy road in the darkest of nights, serving as a chauffeur. I've traveled many a bumpy road in the darkest of nights, serving as a chauffeur to beings of sweet starlight. Guess we're having a few technical glitches. Well, anyways, you get the point. It's going way in advance. It needs to go back to right there. There we go. We can start there. Anyways, my 3-minute story, which is I have some QR codes later so you can catch it if you want to see it again. But basically, I started as a farmer. That's my main hat that I wear. I've been keeping bees professionally now for 27 years. And similar to Cole, I was this young sort of spunky, plucky buck of a woman just wanting to do things and thought I knew a lot, but then really recognized that I needed to learn more. And so similar to Cole, travel is what really opened my eyes, especially coming, as I mentioned, from a humble home in Pueblo Indian country to then traveling the world. And so over 27 years now, I've been, not everywhere, I still have a huge bucket list, but I've been to a lot of places to visit bees and their keepers and to really see the different practices that they use. And one of the things that's really resonated with me the most is, of course, not only those who have indigenous backgrounds, but my own, and in learning how to reconcile different, what we call blood or cellular memories, right? Being part of the conquered and the conqueror, learning how to love ourselves and not hate ourselves for these very sort of conflicting pasts that we have within us. And so for me, it really sort of inspired me to go to Spain. I went to Spain as well, like Cole did, and to visit beekeepers there and to really see how is it that, you know, these people who then came here, how does that work with what they do with their beekeeping, with their endemic honeybees? And I'll talk a little bit about honeybees in particular because there's some misnomers out there, some misunderstandings about the ones that we have here. But to be Indigenous, and I think it might, did it already play through the little thing? You can, I guess I can click it, right? Let's see if this works, yeah. To be Indigenous means to be of a place, right? And so as I mentioned yesterday in my opening, regardless of who you are or where you're from, we all have ancestral roots linked to some Indigenous culture somewhere on this planet. And so for me, that really indicates that we are all brothers and sisters. And though we've had these different conflicting pasts and histories and stories, some of it beautiful, some of it very much not so, right? This is where we are today. And so I don't necessarily dwell in the past, but I do have to acknowledge it, and I have to learn how to reconcile it. And that's what all of us have to do. And together we can actually move forward to create it better and to actually add to one of these original creation stories, which is about the earth and being kin to all the plant and animal relatives that we have, as well as to each other. So Indigenous peoples' ontology, or way of being, is really connected to also their epistemology, which is their way of knowing. And I'm sharing this because for some of you, this may be something you live, and for some of you, it may not be really within sort of your realm at the moment. But I take time to explain this because I do want to show that we all have these similar ways of living our lives that are, again, rooted in our ancestral lineages, whether we are able to acknowledge it immediately or not. And it really is about interconnectedness, right? And learning how from the soil to the sky, everything is really connected. And so for me, when I first got started with my beekeeping, as I mentioned, I started as a Peace Corps volunteer. I ended up then working for several commercial operations, which I'll show here in a minute, and then finally decided, okay, I think I'm ready to start my own op with a partner, who I'll talk about too, because I wouldn't be able to do what I do today without all of these wonderful people in my life to help support this work. But it really is about how we build community, not only within our sort of arenas or disciplines, but also, as Cole mentioned, and as everybody else who has mentioned who's been on this stage, about really working towards developing a relationship not only with place, but with the beloved animals and livestock that we also caretake. So it really is about casting seeds, sharing stories, and also learning and teaching from each other. This is what stewardship is. We are the caretakers of creation, right? And that stewardship, that part of reciprocity, is a part of this larger process of giving and receiving. Please note, I did not say giving and taking. I said giving and receiving. All of this is really about the blessings that we have in our lives, right? And being able to not only receive them, but to also be able to give them. So there's a wonderful paper that came out a few years ago. It's actually by Dr. Michelle Montgomery, who works, she's very interdisciplinary. She's in ethnic studies, she's in environmental science, she's based out of UW in Tacoma. And also Dr. Paulette Blanchard, who's actually a geologist, and she's based out of Haskell University in Oklahoma, or is that Kansas? Sorry. And they wrote a paper basically about why is it that Indigenous graduate students have difficulty finishing their degrees. I myself went back and got my master's. I started it at 45 years old, and I finally finished. I'm now actually thinking of doing a PhD. And I'll share with you my reasons for that because I turned 50 this year. Why would I need a PhD? But I'll share with you why I want to do that. But it's actually rooted a lot in what this paper shares, and it's about the 7 R's of Indigenous research. And so it's more about, and I'll mention this a little bit later, consilience. So remember that word. But the 7 R's are really built upon the original 4 R's, but it's respect, relevance, reciprocity, the giving and receiving, right? The responsibility or the rights that we have as stewards and as caretakers, the relatedness that we see between ourselves and with our plant and animal kin, and also the relationships that we're able to cultivate with everyone. And also about redistribution and reconciliation. And that's going to be different for each of us. There's not a prescriptive way in which we can do that. But I think there are ways in which we all find at a point in our lives where we want to be able to either give back or to help nurture that next generation. So consilience. Consilience, actually, I first learned this word at a Southwest marketing conference. I want to say this was, probably 2010 maybe, in southern Colorado. And it was a grass-fed beef rancher who used the word. And as soon as she said it, everybody starts trying to look up on their phone. What does that mean? And I've loved it ever since. It means unity of knowledge. And so I really see the path forward being a pairing of integrative knowledge systems, taking traditional ecological knowledge from various indigenous practices, but also pairing it with Western sustainable agriculture and ecological science, where appropriate, right? These things can combine, and the sum is greater than its parts. When we can put both of these together, we can actually really advance things a lot more rapidly, but also necessarily in order for us to really keep our planet going. So a little bit more about my path. I started off actually wanting to be a DJ. I was going to move to San Francisco. I was a 90s raver. I can't hear so well out of this year because of too much clubbing at this point. But my plan was I was going to get my undergraduate, I was going to do Peace Corps, and then I was going to move to San Fran and be an electronica DJ. That was the plan. And then the bees found me, and they changed my whole course. And so now the bees are my DJs, which is pretty fun. I still have my turntables, but I ended up going actually I started in marine biology, fisheries, for a couple years. And then I ended up switching to St. John's College, which is here in Santa Fe. It's a great books program. We read a lot about old, dead sort of philosophers, right? But it really helped me to learn how to learn, to become more inquisitive, and to really relish that, to not be shy to ask questions, and to really just go gangbusters in terms of wanting to be a voracious learner. If I want to learn it, I got to go find that information. I got to go live it. I got to go experience it. So I really credit St. John's with giving me that base sort of approach to learning and to being in charge of my own learning. I did the Peace Corps, as I mentioned, and that's how I got introduced to bees, and that changed everything. So the DJing idea kind of faded away, and I ended up working for first Hawaiian Queen in Hawaii, which is, at that point in time, this was back in like 1999. I worked for them for just one season. They produced about 35,000 queen bees a year. And then I actually switched over to Kona Queen, which is the world's largest queen breeding operation. They produce, at that point in time, they used to produce about 300,000 queen bees a year. Now, these are just the mama queens, not all the millions of bees that are taking care of them. But a lot of people don't realize that there's a whole industry just on breeding stock for honeybees. And I happened to start going down that rabbit hole, and I'm still in that rabbit hole because it's really quite amazing and really quite fascinating. I worked there in Hawaii for 5 years, and that's what actually gave me the skills to come back to my home area and really start to do what I do here. In between that, I actually worked at Honeyland Farms, which is in Florida. It's a migratory operation between Wisconsin and Florida, so they move their bees between the two states. Of course, you take them to Florida in the winter, and then you have them in Wisconsin in the summer. And so I learned a lot while I was there. I met my farm partner there. He's from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And so together, we've been working for almost 20 years. Here in New Mexico, we used to run our bees between Michigan and Florida, Florida, New Mexico, Michigan, New Mexico. Now we do New Mexico, California, but we're predominantly here. New Mexico's our home base. And so together we run Zia Queen Bees. We'll be celebrating our 20th year this next season. Thank you. This is my farm partner, Mark, who actually came down off the mountain. He lives at the farm full time, and since I do extension education and work here in Santa Fe, we're about an hour and a half north of here is our farm. It's a little too far to commute each day, so I'm usually here during the week, and our kids go to school here now during the week, so he braved the 12 degrees this morning to come down and actually get our kids to school and stuff. So he's not here at the conference, but he did pop in the other day. But I really wouldn't be able to do any of this without all the work and time and effort that he has put into it as well. And so, yeah, his experience was based in Michigan. When he first came to New Mexico, I still don't know how I convinced him, but I was just like, let's give it a try. We don't know. And my first several years, or actually my first 8 years of beekeeping, was all in tropical places. It was Hawaii and Florida. I knew nothing about keeping bees in my own home state. You asked me about a plant, I'd be like, I know what mesquite looks like. That's about it. And so now, flash forward, and I'm still learning about all the plants, but I've definitely come to learn with him as we've experienced each season. And so you can see this sort of him standing on a truck with all these beehives. And if you can imagine that each one of those hives is a head of cattle, you'll see a lot of parallels in how we manage our livestock. Same with those who are doing hoofed grazing. We just have winged grazing or winged foraging. So yeah, this is this little diagram I put here. We're always looking for clean, good pasture or forageable lands. As a landless farmer, it's really encouraged me to be very, I want to say, open to building relationships. So over the past 20 years, we have, probably close to 50 different farming collaborators who share their space with us at different times of the year and different seasons, depending on where the flows are at. And when I say flow, I mean nectar flow, depending on where there's food for our bees. And so while we rent the place that we have up on the mountain, we're on the high road to Taos. If you end up going towards Penasco and then head towards Sipapu, you'll see us right on the side of the road. You'll see a bunch of bee boxes, and you can't miss us. And we'll be at the Dixon Studio Tour this weekend for anybody who's sticking around. Our kids are going to be slinging honey this weekend at the studio tour, so you can come and get a fresh jar of honey if you're interested. But we basically work with different farmers and collaborators and organizations who are willing to share space, since we don't own any of our own. And then we'll bring our bees in. There's a whole process to it. We got to load them up at night, hence the big truck. We got to drive them through the night, sometimes even more than a day, depending on where we're taking them, especially when we take them to California. It's about a 19-hour drive because we go up to Northern California, the Bay Peninsula Preserve. And we have a collaborator there who I'll show some pictures with too. But yeah, it's a whole process. And you don't want your livestock to overheat. You got to make sure that they have ventilation. You got to make sure that they have water. It's all really, really parallel with what a lot of folks do with cattle. So just for sort of a little info here, those people who aren't familiar, like what is queen bee breeding? There's a lot of different aspects to it, but basically we find regionally acclimated stock. Basically we're developing pedigrees that are good for this region or for the regions that we're working in, and then we graft daughters off of those. And by grafting, it's not slicing and dicing, it's actually just transferring larvae. And so that's what I'm doing with this little headlamp on, and it looks like I have a little tool in my hand. It's actually bamboo and fish cartilage that I use, and I'm able to scoop the right age larva, move it into a special cup. That's this middle blue picture here. And then they actually go into what we call nursery hives or starter finishers. These are hives that do have queens, but their queen is separated down below by a few boxes, so the bees in the upper boxes can't smell her pheromones, and that encourages them to rear new mama queens. And so that middle picture in the bottom is a bunch of ripe queen cocoons, and so they're on a clock. If we don't get them into new homes on time, whoever gets out first is going to chew down and sting out the rest. And so it becomes this race against the clock to make sure that we make new homes for everybody. It's called splitting. We make these what we call mating nucleus hives. So we make these splits off of all of our bigger hives, and then we put a new queen cocoon. And then we have to let them sit for about 3 to, mostly now we wait about 4 or 5 weeks before we go back in. And then we can verify that she's actually laying, and that she's a confirmed layer, and that she's laying fertilized eggs. And then we can actually harvest her, mark her. There's an international color code. On this picture, it shows it as blue. I think this year the color is actually red. I've used hot pink for ours. And then we can put her in a cage and we can ship her pretty much everywhere around the country. Few places we can't ship. We can't ship into Hawaii. We've shipped as far away as Dubai. We've also shipped to Mexico. We've shipped all over the place and all over the country. And our experiences in learning how to do this, especially as similar to Cole mentioned, not inheriting land, not inheriting equipment, not inheriting livestock, really learning from scratch and out of pocket, really put me on this path of recognizing like, wow, we really need, like our industry needs more support for these younger generations that are coming into it, because the average age of the commercial beekeeper now is in their late 60s. And you have a lot of their children who are getting into other things because it's getting to be a harder and harder industry, especially with shifting climate, and especially with lack of having suitable foraging lands for their bees, which in turn is all about nutrition and health. So some of the projects we've worked on, that's sort of the individual thing, but recognizing like there's more of us that need this kind of support. I started applying for grants. My first grant I got in 2007, and now, flash forward 16 years, I've had several, but all of them have been rooted in community aspects. And so one of the first ones I did was the Southwest Survivor Queen Bee Project, which I worked with beekeepers pretty much from central and southern New Mexico who had good stock, but they didn't know how to rear queens. And so I was able to help rear queens, and then they shared them with each other and kind of tested out each other's stock. And then flash forward to 2012, I applied for my second grant, which was a larger project. It included about 9 beekeepers. We had 6 in New Mexico, 3 in Colorado. It spanned close to 500 miles and between 5,000 foot elevation up to 9,000 foot elevation. And that was a bittersweet experience. I learned a lot in that one. At that point in time, I think I was 35, and I did not want to be a director. I wanted us to co-create this kind of cooperative thing with bee breeding. And it worked to a certain degree, but it was definitely, I learned a lot of lessons in how to manage people. And let me tell you something about beekeepers. There's a reason we like working with bugs, because they're a lot easier than working with people. They don't play games. But there's something to be said about working in community, for sure. And so, so I really appreciate all the collaborators that worked with me on these projects, because we all learned together, and it's really led me to where I am now, which is working across different states and with collaborators from coast to coast. So here's just a few pictures of some, like I said, imagine each one of these boxes as a head of cattle. And it's like, oh, I see what you're doing. And so we move them, between different landscapes. We actually, part of our practice now is we take our breeder colonies to Northern California, usually in late January. We don't play the almond pollination game. That's not our focus. I mean, there's a lot of migratory beekeepers who truck hundreds, if not thousands, of their bees cross-country to help with that demand, because there's not enough local California beekeepers to fill the pollination needs just for the almond bloom, which is 1,000 miles of almonds, all blooming within the same time frame, which is usually mid-February to mid-March. And so there's a huge demand for beekeepers to bring their bees. And I think it was in 2008 was the first year that pollination prices exceeded honey prices. So a lot of the commercial guys are now what we call commercial pollinizers. Most folks think, when they think of bees, they think immediately, oh, you do honey. And actually for me, that's my third product. My first is queen bees. And so most of the honey stays with the bees to make queen bees. The second is pollination services. And then the third is actually honey. So everybody finds different ways in which to diversify their outfit. And as a smaller operation, we're a small-scale commercial because we still offer to the public. It really does require us to have sort of multiple baskets with which to do things. So yeah, our main collaborator is now down here in the bottom right. He was actually our first mentee. We've been working with him for 10 years. His name's Aidan Wing. wingsofnaturebees.com is his website. And he actually lives in Pescadero, which is halfway between Santa Cruz and San Francisco. So it's on a very cold and foggy coast. And so believe it or not, it's actually, even though more humid there, it's quite similar temperature-wise to where we are in the mountains in the spring. But his bloom happens a whole 6 weeks before ours do here, and actually closer to 8 weeks before ours does here, because we're at 8,300 foot in the Southern Rockies. So we're able to get a jump on the season. We're able to share stock with him. He's a one-man band. We're a two-people band, and so we're able to work together collectively to get the work done. We usually always have an intern or assistants or people who are coming by to help, and so it's really become, as cliche as it sounds, it is very true. It takes a community to raise bees. And so Aiden actually shares his lovely apiary spots with us. Again, as landless farmers, he's also a landless farmer. And so having these collaborations with different ranchers and other farmers with which to share space and to be able to grow our livestock together is really essential for this to work. So one of the things that sort of came out of our relationship with Aiden, but also, again, kind of connecting back to that thought of recognizing how difficult it was to learn. I mean, I started going to California initially because there's no other commercial bee breeders here in New Mexico, and I wanted to learn more. And as a first-generation beekeeper, meaning not having grown up in a family who's been doing it, I needed to learn from people who knew more and who had more experience. So I started going out there initially just to go visit other commercial bee breeding operations to see how they ran things, to see how they did it. I had my experience from working for 3 commercial ops, gleaned what I could from them, but then also wanted to see how these mom and pop ops were functioning. And so with that, flash forward now, I recognize that these newer beekeepers, if we want them to stay with it, if we want them to go professional and to be able to make a bona fide livelihood with it, they're going to need support. And so the more recent grant I've applied for is actually what's called a Research to Grassroots grant. It's based on my previous bee breeding grants, but it actually includes now, I'll share the screen, it includes 24 collaborators, 12 of which are professional commercial bee breeders. A couple of them are brand new to it. Some of them have been doing it for a couple decades. And then it also includes 12 research institutions or researchers from varying institutions. And so this is actually a network now who's looking at making climate smart and adaptive research for supporting healthy bee breeding or bee reproductive applications. So a lot of folks may be like, well, beekeeping for bees or beekeeping for honey or for pollination, but for a lot of us, we may not necessarily see how that directly connects with what you may be actually doing if you're working with livestock. Alfalfa needs seed. The bees are pollinating for that seed, right? The forbs, the wildflowers, all of these a lot of them are relying on pollination. And in order for the bees to have the good nutrition, the soil has to be healthy. So the livestock, in turn, is also helping to rebuild that soil with their dung, with their hoof work, and really helping these seeds to come into being. And so it really is a very circular and interconnected relationship between bees and beef, so to speak. Our Adaptive Bee Breeders Alliance, our grant kicked in last year. I've got a few kind of cool we had our first meeting last January, where there's a huge conference called the American Beekeeping Federation Conference. I serve on the board of that organization. We have our big conference coming up in New Orleans in January. Hopefully they'll have it in New Mexico at some point, but we have our next meeting coming up there. But that picture was taken actually at the last one, which was in Jacksonville, Florida. The Adaptive Bee Breeders Alliance actually includes some breeders who have specialized work. So believe it or not, we actually do some instrumental insemination with bees as well. And this is actually to capture distinct genetics or to be able to cryopreserve them and to put them in the tank for long-term preservation so that then we can actually then share them with breeders in the future or across distances. It's one of the many tools that breeders use, but it is not the answer for breeding a better bee, because just like all the different livestock we're working with, there's not any one single kind that is good for everywhere. So we work with a lot of different producers working on different aspects of bee breeding. One of my closest friends is Megan Mahoney. She actually grew up in the South Valley of Albuquerque, and she's a commercial professional beekeeper now. Her and her fiance run a satellite inseminated queen operation within a larger commercial migratory business. They move their bees between Texas and North Dakota. And then we also do some collaboration work with Julia Mahood, who's actually a hobbyist beekeeper. She actually works in Georgia. She's based in Atlanta, But she took a master beekeeping course and developed this method of using drones or UAVs, flying machines, for actually capturing and locating bee drone congregation areas. So it's drones finding drones. The drone congregation areas, or DCAs we call them for short, will help breeders recognize and figure out where are their bees mating, because this happens in the air, right? Above our heads, we don't see it. But it will help them to then map it out and then be able to actually strategize where they want to place their apiaries, which is where they hold bees, and then make sure that their bees are mated well. So we started this project. She came out to New Mexico. We're going to bring her back out next year. Megan was actually really good at getting a few of our members trained in instrumental insemination. It's you know, you have to learn basic beekeeping, then you have to learn queen rearing, and then you can learn how to do II, is what we call it for short. And it's basically then targeting things together. Thank you. I think I'm running out of time, so I better hurry. So I'll get to the real juice here as I can. This really all in turn is because it's about the next generation. And so these are my kids. Actually, one of the photos in my little video showed 2 dancers in their regalia. Those are my children. And the picture on the left at the top is me with my daughter, who was 5 years old at the time. And the bottom one, sort of in the middle, is her now. And she's 15 and 2 inches taller than me. So times have changed, but she helps me move bees. She's actually going to be labeling honey tonight to go sell it this weekend. So, and then that's my son as well, who's now 12. So some of my work at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and I really appreciate Alicia mentioning it this morning. We have a whole tribal beekeeping and pollinator stewardship program that we do. We do everything from looking at nutritional value of pollens and honeys, of not only pollinator-friendly plants, but also of grasses and also of culturally relevant plants. I'm going to kind of breeze through some of these, but I would encourage you to check out IAIA. It is an art school, but it's a very diversified art school. And it's open to all peoples. It's considered a tribal college. And it's been around for 60 years, but it does have a variety of different disciplines. We have over 90 tribes represented in our student body, and we also have students who are non-self-identifying Indigenous and also international students as well. So it's an open campus. We do a lot of youth programming. The middle picture is not tortillas, that's seed paper right there. But we do a lot with youth and reconnecting them with foodways and with growing food. And then we also have a seed program as well, so we're always growing out seed, collecting seed, and sharing seed. And then also medicines and food that can come about with that and doing workshops on it. We do a podcast where we actually, or not a podcast, sorry, a webinar series where we highlight different Indigenous scholars, artists, chefs, farmers, all sorts of folks, and the wonderful projects that they're working on. And we also have a habitat restoration program. So I think Alicia showed one of our spiral gardens. We do what we call pollinator floral oases, especially here in the Southwest where we don't have that regular rainfall. We'll do these sort of little plots where we're putting pollinator forage in and then being able to make sure that they get water. And the picture where you see with the pottery is actually what we call rain oyas. So these get buried in the ground. They capture the water and then they slowly seep out. And so this is one of the methods that we use. And it really is about, as I mentioned, bringing in Indigenous knowledge systems, but showing that there are these relational tapestries that come about that are woven together, right? So for me, it's really come down to science, culture, and art. And really working within that diversity. Okay. I think this is just QR codes if you guys want. This is a link, so hopefully they'll be able to email it out. I want to kind of wrap this up here because I know you guys are all hungry. Let's see here. If you want to see a film, I'm not going to play it, you can, to learn more about the IAIA Land Grant Program, you can check that out here. It's on Vimeo. And yeah, this is some pictures from our pollinator program, and actually more specifically our bees. We have bees in adobe hives. We're doing a larger project with that right now. As I mentioned, we do pollen collection for nutritional analysis, and being able to teach students is really an exciting aspect for me because I'm at this point now where I'm synthesizing what I've learned and continuing to learn, but really want to be able to help nurture that next generation. So it is about our ancestors, and as I mentioned earlier, I was going to talk to you all about American honeybees, which are really a reflection of the melting pot themselves. They are a mix. Folks may not realize this. Folks may think that honeybees are foreigners to this land, and it's partially true, but not completely. We actually do, or did, have our own native North American honeybee called Apis nearctica. And so fossil evidence was found in Nevada dated 14 million years old. So they were here before, just like horses were, although horses used to be the size of house cats, which is kind of cool. And then there was an ice age event. We don't know what happened to these bees, but they lived here and they coexisted with all sorts of other pollinator species as well. So I like to think of our contemporary honeybees, which were brought over, and the way they've adapted to being cousins to this ancestor bee. So it really is about trying to find that balance between all the different elements, right? Between the air, the water, the earth, also fire, using it responsibly, and being able to recalibrate and balance. And so that has been part of my work. Hopefully this will pop up. Yeah. So one of the things that I was able to do as a New Mexico Coalition to Enhance Working Lands Fellow last year was receive a little bit of seed money to start this larger idea for what I call the flower path, or Poeh, is the Indigenous term that we use. And it's actually a group of Indigenous matriarchs. There's 5 of us. Roxanne Swenschel from the Flowering Tree Permaculture Institute is a part of that. We've got Beata Sosi Pena, who's a huge environmental justice and worker, and also educator and doula. And we've got Addie Lucero, who runs Dancing Butterfly Naturals. She's an Indigenous-owned wellness and healthcare product line. She grows a lot of what she uses. She also forages for a lot of it. And also Teresa Quintana, who I work with at IAIA. And so together, we really felt the need to respond to the huge wildfires that happened. My farm was impacted. I had to move everything out. It took 2 weeks to move everything out. Even though the fire didn't hit our actual place, we had sooty embers landing in the front yard, and I couldn't do any actual breeding last year because of that. We didn't know which way the fire was going to go, so I couldn't set up my proper spots. But at any rate, we really wanted to help rebuild seed caches, or seed houses. And so with some of this grant money and with additional funding that we're receiving, we're going to be making satellite seed houses, and then also doing regional bee breeding and various pollinator work here in New Mexico. If you want to learn more about understanding Indigenous perspectives, this is a really cool online free course that you guys can check out. It's through the University of Toronto. And one of the last things I want to share is some of my work now has really led into policy work. I'm still learning about that. I don't know if I have the stomach for it, but I'm trying. But we're really trying to push forward a pollinator health or pollinator protection plan for New Mexico. There was a 2014 presidential memorandum that came out requiring all states to develop one. New Mexico still does not have one, and we're going on 10 years from that call out. And so last year we tried to get it through the legislature. There was, of course, drama, because that's how politics works, and so I'm learning a lot. But we're going to be pushing forward with it again. And it really, this particular working group that we're working on, it does include pesticide applicators, does include beekeepers, does include farmers, and also includes scientists, so that we can get a more comprehensive plan that allows everybody to do what they need to do responsibly, but to really help better steward pollinators. So the Senate Memorial 43, that's the number from last year. The number will probably change this year, but there's a smaller QR code there, and if you're interested in reading the actual full document, I encourage you to check that out or visit newmexicobeekeepers.org. And with that, thank you so much. Appreciate it.